First, buy a short sleeve t-shirt. Cut some material from the bottom of the t-shirt if it's too long. If you have a problem with cutting, if it hurts your hands, because of my surgery, I bought these scissors online. They're electric and you don't have to press. If the t-shirt is too wide, take the side seams in, a bigger side seam with 2 stitchings, and then cut off the excess. Mark 4 areas on the t-shirt. The front must be marked with 2 pins vertically in the seam area, and the back just 1 pin in the seam area, and the sides, if it doesn't have side seams, you mark it with a pin. If it has side seams, you can just know that that's the side. The width has to be 3 to 4 times the width of the bottom of your t-shirt. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it can be 3 with a little less gathers. The length of the material should be measured from the bottom of the sleeve armhole to the bottom of the shirt, and then add 4 inches. Approximately 4 inches. The seam of the skirt right sides together, and I'll sew the seam and then press it open. I stitch it so it will stay at the bottom by going back or pressing a hold stitch. Press the seam open so it's flat, so that when you sew it won't be double, because it's hard to gather if it's double. Fold the fabric in half, making sure that the seam is in the back, and then you fold it again. Now you have the 4 widths. The front is marked with 2 pins, the back has the seam. As you can see, when it's folded in quarters, the front is marked with 2 pins, the back has the seam, and the side seams are marked with pins. Whenever you're stitching any gathering stitch, you always put it on the longest machine setting so that it's easier to pull. To make the gathering stitches, be sure you start at the center back and go all around and end at the center back. But the first stitching you do is 1/4 of an inch down from the raw edge at the top of the skirt, 1/4 of an inch down. Then I have already sewn this so you can see it in black. Then your next stitch is 1/4 of an inch further down from the first stitching, or 1/2 an inch from the raw edge. When gathering the skirt, you pull the threads from the underside of the fabric because it won't gather if you pull the ones on the front. Now, pull the threads to gather the skirt all the way from the center back to the center front where the 2 pins are. The reason you always pull it to the center front is because if it's not exactly right, you can pull some of the gathers out and make it match. Now that we have gathered one side of the skirt from the center back to the center front, we're going to pull the gathering stitches on the other side. You have to pull them from the underside stitching, and sometimes it's hard to find the underside stitching, and so I take a pin and go from the underside and pull up the stitches so that I can find the right ones. The object now is to get the pins in the skirt to match the pins in the t-shirt. So here we've got the 2 pins, which means that center front. You match those, and then this pin has to go over to the side, and it's not quite far enough, so you pull it out, and now the pin would go there, and then stretch your gathers out so that they're even all along there. Then you do the back. Once you get that even, so that's matching, then you do the side to the back. And the side pin here, and see it's gathered too much. Here's your back center seam. So pull it out and then stretch your gathers out so that it matches. This pin matches and the side seams match. After you've got the gathers even, then you do the same thing on the other half from front to back. Once you've got the gathers done, you match the 4 points of the t-shirt to the skirt, putting the 2 pins of the t-shirt next to the 2 pins of the skirt and the back seam to the back, center back of the skirt. Then after you have put a pin in to mark the 1/4 points, you start pinning very close. I actually take the 1/4 point and go like this and find then halfway and then halfway again. And then I pin them really close. Can you see? You need to see how close. Pin from the fabric side. Now this is the underside, but you pin from there. When you pin the pins close together, you have to go down exactly 1/2 inch below this bottom stitching and then come up with the pin right at the bottom stitching. And then 1/2 inch below and come up right at the top, at the bottom of that stitching. One of the most important things when you're doing this is to make sure that you pin from the right side, and every time you pin, turn it and look and make sure that it's pinned correctly. I've done this to show you what you can do. It happens all the time. This gets caught up in here. If you don't look and check every single time you do your pin, put your pin in and come up and then check in the back to make sure you haven't caught the skirt material in your pin. Every time you pin. And you have to pin that close, and the reason you do is because if you don't pin that close, I'll take some of these pins out and show you, then your material, when you're sewing on this side, your material can get caught up like this in your sewing. So you have to be sure that you pin as close as every 1/4 inch. People try to get by without pinning that much, and then they'll have to unpick it. I have never had to unpick one single time if they're pinned this close. You have to sew on the t-shirt side because it's stretchy, and if you try to sew on this side, the t-shirt will gather up and make a mess. So we're going to sew on the t-shirt side, and we're going to sew at the top of those pins. Then when you've finished, where the pin comes up right at the bottom of the gathering stitch, then it doesn't show on the right side when you're finished. When I stitch at the top of the pins, that stitching ends up just below the gathering stitches so they don't show on the other side. All the pins, I do them several at a time. Now that your pins are all out, you turn it right side out, and you can see that your stitches don't show on this side. When you finish the dress and sewn it together, you can put any kind of trim on it that you want. I put this lace on the easy way so I can make more dresses. If I did it the way it should be done, there would be lining that would cover up this raw edge. But I don't think these little girls care about that, so I do it the fast way and just sew it on the bottom after it's finished. When you put the trim on, you can put a bow on, you can put it at the waist, you could put a bow at the top. You can do anything you want to. You can even cut out a flower out of here and applique it on the top if you have a plain shirt. But I found that takes an awful lot of time, so I don't usually do appliques. This is the finished product, and I really appreciate you inquiring about it and trying to help. And I know these little girls will be very happy that you've put in your service hours to help them have a happier life. Thank you.